Hey everybody, Wendy Sellers here, the HR lady. Welcome back to my podcast. We are here today to talk about how 2025 is already being a stressful year. And we thought we left burnout behind in December 24. Nope, not so much. So we are here today with a very special guest to talk about and focus on avoiding burnout as a leader. And then hopefully as a leader, you could then just help your employees to avoid burnout, which turns out that if you help them avoid burnout, guess what? You get to retain them. Yay. Now you just saved some recruiting dollars. So with that said, welcome to the show, Gabrielle Espinosa, MSOL. Hello.
Hello, Wendy. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Hey, you have 4 initials after your name on LinkedIn, MSOL. What the heck does that stand for?
Happy to help. So it's Master of Science in Organizational Leadership. And so if you are a leadership fanatic like I am, yes, you can get an advanced degree in it. And so I got my degree a couple years ago, and it was one of the best things I could have done, learning a lot about organizational theory and different leadership theory and how we can apply it in companies so that ultimately we can be effective leaders and help retain our people.
I love it. Oh my goodness, I love it. I'm so glad I asked that question. So tell our listeners a little bit about yourself besides the expertise in that. What is your background and how did you get to where you are now? And where are you now? And what do you do?
Yes, good question. So I'm Gabrielle, and I am the founder of Self Leader Consulting, where I help companies build effective leadership development programs. And so typically I'm partnering with HR leaders, talent development leaders, and making sure that we're building out scalable programs. I do also have a 9 to 5 as well. And so I also work at a tech company where I do all training and development work, manager development. And so I've been in the training and leadership space for quite some time now. And it was something that I always had a passion in. And so when I graduated school and realized, wow, you could be in leadership and, L&D and help people become better at their craft, I was all for it. Sign me up. This is what I want to do with my life. And ever since, I've just really been focusing on empowering people to be effective in their job. And so that was a main driver for me starting my business and being able to even scale that impact even further. And so that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, so you don't have a whole lot of downtime, a full-time job or
Nope.
running a business at the same time. You just moved. Yeah,
Yes.
you're a go-getter. Good for you. We need that. But I want to make sure you don't get burned out because in
Mhm.
2024, 44% of US employees reported feeling burned out at work. I own my
Yep.
own business, and I got to tell you, by the end of December, I was like, I just want to lay down for like 3 weeks.
Oh, yeah.
So,
No. Yeah.
help our listeners understand burnout a little bit. As a leader or just as a human, how do you recognize the signs of burnout in yourself and then in your team?
Yes. And I mean, hey, I think that this is a topic that everyone can relate to because burnout is everywhere. I mean, whether you go on Google or, you're on Instagram, whatever it might be, you're seeing articles or content that is talking about workplace burnout, chronic stress and the impact. And so it's something that I think everyone is familiar with if they haven't experienced it already. And I think first it's important to understand what burnout is and what causes it, because once we understand that, we can start to develop proactive solutions to address it. And so, burnout, it's really that state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion that's caused by prolonged stress. And so in the workplace, we all face workplace pressure and stress, but it becomes unhealthy when we're living in a prolonged state of stress. And so there's 2 main buckets that really contribute to burnout. And the first bucket being the excessive workload, and then the second bucket being lack of support. And so as a leader, if your people have too much work on their plate, they're overwhelmed working these late hours, chances are they're going to burn out. But when you add on top of that, there's a lack of expectations, when they lack autonomy in how they do their work, it gets even worse. And then on the other side, when we look at a lack of perceived support, if you don't build a genuine relationship with your employee where they understand and trust you and know that you're there for their well-being and their support, that could also lead to burnout because they might not feel comfortable saying to you, hey, I'm feeling overwhelmed. And then also, if we're not recognizing our people and saying, hey, good job, thanking them for their contributions, that can cause some cynicism and they might start to feel unappreciated. And that can lead to burnout as well. So it's really making sure that we're monitoring as leaders the workload of our people, proactively identifying opportunities to reduce it, and having those conversations and check-ins to make sure that they have energy, that their workload is manageable, that they feel appreciated. And so with keeping those main drivers in mind, we can start to proactively do those things as leaders and also be aware of it ourselves. Because if I look at my workload and I'm like, this isn't manageable. Like I am in back-to-back meetings or I have all these projects and I don't have any time for myself. I know that I need to start setting boundaries and saying no so that I can deliver the best quality work. And so the same drivers serve for a leader as well as your employee. And so that awareness can definitely help you take control of that.
Yeah, absolutely. My goodness, you hit so many key points, about physical fatigue, emotional exhaustion, then also, your brain, cognitive
Yes.
wariness, right? And the other thing is this has a huge impact on your health as well. So, with burnout and physical fatigue, emotional exhaustion, your brain
Yep.
just not working properly, you also have risks of anxiety and depression and even diabetes as well.
Wow. Yes. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's huge. So, how about this? I have a question though, because I think you and I probably do this to ourselves. Most business leaders do, where we say, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. So, what do we do when our employees say that? And we're trying to we're pulling projects away from them or changing deadlines. And they're like, no, 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 I'm fine, I'm fine. What do we do?
That's a really good question because I think that there are some people, even if they have that relationship with you, they don't want to disappoint, or maybe they're high achievers and they want to take more on because they feel that need to prove themselves. They're go-getters. And there are a lot of people like that in the workforce and we want to have them. I mean, they do incredible work. But I think as a leader, one way that you can start to mitigate that is by demonstrating and modeling that behavior. And
Leading by
so
example.
exactly. So making sure saying, hey, we're not going to take on as a team more than 2 to 3 projects, or each person is only going to have one main project or priority followed by a secondary one. And that is the expectation for the team. That's what I'm doing as the leader, and then modeling that and then communicating the importance of productivity over busyness and quality over quantity, because sometimes people think that they're being very productive and that they're getting a lot of work done, but it isn't at the quality because they have too much going on. There's too much context switching. And so I think as a leader, modeling and communicating what the goal is and that education piece, it can really help some of those go-getters take a step back and say, I actually was just trying to stay busy to show that I'm working hard, but working hard doesn't have to look like always being in back-to-back meetings or constantly getting projects out the door. It's really, what is the quality of those projects and the impact that they ultimately deliver?
So you hear that, leaders? We mandate as of today that you go ahead and schedule your days off immediately, and then go ahead and share that with your team to say, hey, I just scheduled all my days off for January, February, March, April. And what's your schedule look like? Let's take some days off. Some
Yes.
people will say, oh, I don't want to do that because I want to cash in my PTO or whatever it is, if your policy allows that. Still convince them, all right, well, you've already worked 40 hours, and especially if there's salary, why don't you just take Friday off and you don't have to take PTO? Now, you do have to make sure your policies are consistent with all of that so
Right.
you don't get in trouble of discrimination, but it is important. I mean, I did just take off like almost 2 weeks over the Christmas, New Year's break, which I haven't done in a gazillion years. And I made myself busy doing other things, visiting family, visiting
Yeah.
friends, checking things off my list because I do like to stay busy, but I stayed away from my computer for the most part, and my clients respected it too. I had to work like a day and a half through that whole 2 week period. But let me just tell you, what ended up happening is I was brainstorming so many ideas about, marketing and this, that, and the other, not purposely. I was just talking to somebody and they shared something. I was like, hold on, let me write myself an email or put that down in my iPhone notes and then just forget about it. I'll deal with that later. So
Yeah.
it is true, though, that when you are preventing burnout and you give people
Yes.
rest, they get more creative and maybe even more, I don't know, thankful for the position that they're in.
Exactly. I mean, if we're constantly in execution mode, how can we take a step back and think strategic, be visionary, and really be goal oriented? It takes mental capacity and space to be able to take a step back. But if we're not allowing ourselves the opportunity to do that, then we're not going to be able to ultimately set those goals, put a plan in place of how we're going to get there if we're just in pure execution.
Yeah, it's so important. I mean, I already also talked to, so we know the impact on the team, right? We know the impact
Yes.
on the team, on the customers, the clients, the work product. You might get shoddy work because somebody's burnt out, even though they're still working 70
Yeah.
hours and pumping out work. It's not the best work. They might also have an attitude problem because they're tired and exhausted, and then
Yes.
may have a health problem as well. But it also has an impact on relationships outside of work. Another statistic I was looking up getting ready for this podcast is it says 76% of US workers report that workplace stress negatively impacts their relationships outside of work. I think that's a
Yeah.
duh. No, duh,
Yep.
really?
Yep.
Right? But it's huge because, if we as leaders are not stepping in and kind of mandating or even gently, or maybe not gently, making our employees take some time off and figure out how to
Yeah.
redo their schedules and their projects, we could be the cause of a divorce or, a
Yeah.
parent child relationship going sour. And I don't
Yeah.
know about you, but I couldn't live with that.
Absolutely not. And that's why I think, again, from a leadership perspective, it's so important to model these behaviors because if you're a leader and you're sending Slack messages and emails at 10 p.m. at night, if you're trying to get in touch with an employee while they're on PTO, that's really signaling to them that they don't have work-life balance, that they don't have a space where they can take a step back. We're showing them that they need to be always on. And so if you're a leader, after you log off at 5:30, don't send messages to your team after that time. If they're on PTO, it can wait till they get back. Let's respect that boundary. And then also as a leader, making sure, to your point, that you are taking time off, that you are modeling that balance and that well-being, and also setting boundaries and saying no when projects come your team's way, when you know that they're already at capacity. And I know that that can be hard for leaders, especially when they want to support their other business partners. But if your team doesn't have the capacity, by saying yes, you might be pleasing that business partner, but you're doing it at the expense of your health and your team. And so just recognizing that, I think, is very important because it's not just a you issue, it is a team issue.
Yeah, and I like to say yes, and I can do that, but not this week.
Yes,
Yes, my team can
exactly.
do this, but not at that deadline. Yes, we can do
Mhm.
that, but not for 2 more months. And so,
Exactly.
you have to, as a leader, you have to be a wall, and it's hard. And I want to go back to the fact of focusing on the leader for burnout too, because we're telling the leaders on this podcast today to
Yeah.
protect your team at all costs. That's going to cause burnout on you too. So leaders, please start, being the one that raises their hand and say, hey, no, you can't give anything else to my team and you can't give anything else to me. And this is what's going to happen, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I love the concept of self leadership, which is we can't lead others effectively unless we lead ourselves first. And so, really looking at how are you showing up? Are you modeling these behaviors? Because how you show up for yourself is going to impact how you show up for other people. And so, by putting yourself first, self care, that isn't selfish. It really is one of the best ways that you show other people that you care about them because you're going to take the time for yourself so that you can give your best effort to the team, to your work, to your family. But it doesn't come from anywhere. It really comes from making sure that you're prioritizing your well-being first.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about, understanding burnout. Self-care is super, super important, no matter what role you're in, making sure that you're leading by example and making sure that we're preventing burnout so that we can keep our employees, keep them not
Yes.
only employed, but engaged and productive and
Hmm.
hopefully happy that they're bragging about our company. One last thing before we wrap up here, how do we manage external expectations and internal pressures as a leader? Like if you can give one or two pieces of advice without, compromising your own well-being, what would that piece of advice be to say, how do we manage my expectations of my team?
I think one of the things that I've noticed in working with a lot of top performing leaders and the way that they're able to remain top performing and sustain that while also maintaining their health, it really comes down to them having a very clear understanding of their values, knowing what that looks like in practice, and then communicating those because who we are is how we lead ourselves and others. And so by understanding that one of your core values is, for example, courage, then it's saying, okay, if someone comes to me and says that they need my team and myself to work on a project and we don't have bandwidth, it might be uncomfortable to say, no, I don't have capacity right now, but leaning into courage and saying, hey, one of my key values is courage. And while this might be a little uncomfortable, I'm going to have to say no right now, but let's talk again in another month once we wrap up a couple of these other projects. And so I think being very clear on your values and communicating them not only to your stakeholders, but your team, and then encouraging them to do the same. Because again, you're modeling those behaviors and showing them that it's okay to set boundaries, that it's actually a good thing and celebrated. And so personally, that's how I manage expectations with,
I love it.
as a business owner, as an employee, it's being very clear on my values and then communicating what I am and am not willing to do, because I know at the end of the day, I need to have the health to support the vision I have for myself. And so that has to come first.
I love it. And for those that are listening, if you're saying, you know what, do we even have company values? If we do, I don't know what they are. Well, if you don't know what they are, I can assure your team doesn't know what they are. So if you are looking to refresh your company values or start from scratch, I actually wrote a book. I won't say the name of the title because it does have a curse word in it, but it's about how to deal with crappy leaders and jerks at work. And in that book is a step-by-step guide on how to create or update company values. And then I want you to make sure you put those company values in your job descriptions, in your job postings, make it part of the interview process, and make it part of every single employee feedback/review process too, because then it'll be, oh, these are real. They actually want me to show respect, use self-care, set boundaries, have awesome work, so on and so forth. So I love that you like company values too, because I think it could just make a world of a difference for every single team member out there.
Oh,
With that
absolutely.
said, thank you so much for all this information today. Before we wrap up, how can our listeners connect with you?
The best place to connect with me is on LinkedIn, Gabrielle Espinosa. I'm always interested to learn from other people and share best practices. So please feel free to send me a message and we can set up a chat.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'll make sure that her LinkedIn link is in the podcast explanation. So check that out. And in case you did not know, this podcast, The HR Lady, is on the radio too. We are on podcast radio in the Carolinas, Detroit, Southwest Florida, and Tampa Bay. Thanks for joining, everybody. Take care and stay safe.